So what happens when the very person in charge of writing our laws turns around and says they don't actually know the law? Well, today we're going to dive into a case of political accountability that really hinges on that exact question, and it all centers on one pretty surprising statement from a very powerful figure.
Just think about this for a second. We have this system where we elect officials, and we put them in a position of immense trust and responsibility, right? Their main job, their whole purpose, is to write, understand, and uphold the legal framework that we all live by. So what happens?
When that very person, the one in charge, gets asked about the laws they oversee and just says, "I don't know." That is the exact situation we're looking at today, and man, it brings up some really big questions about leadership and who's accountable for what.
Now, to really get why that statement is such a big deal, you first have to understand who said it. So let's meet the individual right at the heart of this whole story.
Okay, so this is Jaime Canton Rocha. And listen, he's not just any legislator. We're talking about the president of the Congress of Baja California. He's the guy leading the entire legislative body. But here's the real kicker, the thing that makes this so interesting. He's also a lawyer by profession.
So just let that sink in. We're talking about someone whose entire career, both in the political arena and in his professional life, is literally built around understanding and working with the law. That context is absolutely crucial, because it's exactly why his later statements caused such a stir.
So what did he actually say? Well, the core of this whole thing boils down to two different interviews where Canton Rocha was asked about the laws that govern how political parties can fund their activities. First up, in a YouTube interview, he got a question about his own political party, Morena, and whether they were using concerts to raise money. His response was pretty direct. The truth is, I am unaware of that topic.
And this wasn't just a one-off comment. A month later, in a news interview, he was asked about tax-free events for political parties. And according to the source, he gave almost the exact same answer. He was unaware of the law. You start to see a pattern here, right? So, what are we supposed to make of all this? The sources we're looking at really point to two very different possibilities for why he'd say this. Is it a genuine case of, I don't know, or is something else going on entirely?
But before we get into that, let's just hit pause and remember the core principle at stake here: legislative responsibility. I mean, it's the fundamental expectation that lawmakers actually know the rules they're in charge of. That's the baseline, the standard we measure them against.
So the news source kind of frames this as a dilemma where there's no good answer. On one side, if Canton Rocha is genuinely ignorant of these laws, well, the source calls that alarming, especially for the president of Congress, who again is a lawyer. But on the other side, if he does know and he's just refusing to answer, that's seen as possible evidence that he's trying to hide something. Either way you slice it, the implications are pretty serious. Okay, so let's zoom out from this specific case for a minute and just ask the bigger question. Why should we even care? Why is it so fundamental for a lawmaker to know this stuff in any democracy?
Because think about it, a lawmaker's knowledge is absolutely critical to every single part of their job. You can't write new laws if you don't know the old ones. You can't possibly oversee the government or ensure transparency if you're not even aware of the basic rules of the game.
And let's be really clear here. The laws Canton Rocha claimed he didn't know, these aren't some obscure minor technicalities. We're talking about the nuts and bolts of the whole political process, how parties get their money, what tax breaks they can get, and the actual rules for elections. This stuff is central to fairness and public trust.
At the end of the day, when we citizens elect a representative, we're basically trading our vote for their competence and their knowledge. That knowledge is the currency of public trust. And when that's called into question, the entire relationship between the public and its leaders, it starts to fall apart.
So all of this really leaves us with one final big question. When a leader says, I don't know, does the responsibility just stop there? Or does it then fall on the rest of us, the press, and everyday citizens to demand clarity and hold power to account? That's a question every single one of us has to think about.